What can companies do to stay successful as new technologies keep disrupting every industry? Netflix displaced Blockbuster, but Burberry has been going since 1856. In this lesson, you'll learn the 4 things that corporate leaders can do to innovate and to stay on top. Welcome to the Tech for Non-Techies podcast. I'm your host, tech entrepreneur, executive coach, and Chicago Booth MBA, Sophia Matveeva. My aim here is to help you have a great career in the digital age. In a time when even your coffee shop has an app, you simply have to speak tech. On this podcast, I share core technology concepts, help you relate them to business outcomes, and most importantly, share practical advice on what you can do to become a digital leader today. If you want to have a great career in the digital age, this podcast is for you. Hello, smart people. How are you today? In this lesson, we are going to cover part 2 of the innovator's dilemma, when new technologies cause great firms to fail. And this book is by Clayton Christensen. My name is Sophia Matveeva, and I am the CEO and founder of Tech for Non-Techies, an executive education company. I've also lectured on tech and entrepreneurship at Oxford University, London Business School, and Chicago Booth, and I've written for the Harvard Business Review. I made this lesson to cover the innovator's dilemma because this book is hugely influential in Silicon Valley. In fact, I interviewed the former CFO of Netflix, David Wells, on the Tech for Non-Techies podcast, and he told me how the lessons from this book are being used at Netflix and how they were used at Netflix in their early stages. And clearly, it worked out for them. So this is why I want you to learn from it too. The lessons from this book are useful both for people working in large companies and for people in the entrepreneurial ecosystem. So for founders, for investors, and for people like lawyers who are working with founders and venture capitalists. Large successful companies cannot survive unless they innovate. Innovation means opening up new value pools, which basically means finding new ways to make new products and sell them to new people. So if you have ambitions to be in the C-suite of a major corporate, you have to know innovation principles because you will have to use them at some point in your career. Netflix displaced Blockbuster, but Burberry has been around since the 19th century, and they were the first luxury business on Facebook. So not every corporate has to get old and crusty and die off. And if you are in the tech ecosystem, you have to evaluate which corporate is a real threat to a startup's growth and which one isn't. If you're a founder, by the way, this will also help you plot your exit strategy, which is exciting and, investors also like that. So do I have your attention now? In part 1, and that's the lesson before this one, we learned why great companies fail. And the main point is that they fail not because they're stupid or complacent. In fact, they are neither. The very thing that has caused them to become great and super successful is usually the same thing that causes their failure. Here's what Christensen writes in the book. In the case of well-managed firms, good management was the most powerful reason they failed to stay atop their industries. Precisely because these firms listened to their customers, invested aggressively in new technologies, and those technologies would provide their customers more and better products. And because these companies carefully studied market trends and systematically allocated investment capital to innovations that promised the best returns, they lost their positions of leadership. Kind of feels unfair. In this lesson, we are going to cover what to do about this sorry state of affairs, because clearly just working harder doesn't seem to do it. So here are 4 lessons that corporates can do to keep innovating and to stay successful as new technologies emerge. I really want you to pay attention to this because generative AI is all the rage now. And yes, there's a lot of hype about the technology, but it is undoubtedly going to disrupt industries. So this is why these lessons are especially timely now. So let's get to lesson 1 to help corporate leaders succeed in the face of technological change. Number 1, give the new product to new customers, not existing customers. And I'll show you what this means in practice with a case study in a minute. But remember what we learned in lesson 1 in the previous video. A new invention is usually cheaper and crappier than the main product that a corporate is selling. That's why the fancy rich clients of a corporate, they don't want the cheap new crappy thing. And so that's why innovations in large companies often fail. So here's an example. You know the printers that people have in their offices. So those massive printers, they're like absolutely enormous. And they also look really expensive, well, because they are. And now think of the printer that you have at home. It's much smaller and it's much cheaper. And this illustrates my point, and this example is actually in the book. Hewlett Packard, which we'll call HP, began selling laserjet printers in the 1980s. And laserjet printers are the huge big things you see in offices. And laserjet printers produce higher quality printing and they move faster, so they print faster. And obviously this really matters in an office because you're going to have a huge print queue. Then a technology was invented called inkjet printing, and the quality of inkjet printing is just not as good. And the corporates that were buying laserjet printers, they didn't want to compromise on quality, they didn't want to compromise on time. Because imagine like a fancy law firm or an investment bank or a consultancy, would they want to have crappier printers than their competitors? Would Goldman Sachs agree to have crappier printers than JP Morgan? Oh my God, perish the thought. But who didn't care? People like you and me. People who wanted printers at home. I don't have a massive office printer at home, and I'm assuming that you don't either. So by creating this simpler and crappier and cheaper product, HP opened a whole new market for themselves. They expanded their value pool and thus carried on being rich and successful. And what they didn't try to do is they didn't try to take these cheap, crappy products and try to shove them down the throat of their corporate customers. See, that's smart. Now let's move on to lesson 2. Match the size of the organization to the size of the market. In last week's lesson, we talked about how incentives in big companies are literally exactly the thing that stand in between innovation. So if you're a leader in a corporate and your annual target is $50 million a year for an existing product, you're going to be completely focused on making sure that your unit produces $50 million in revenue. And then if you hear that there's some sort of new invention that could make about $1 million a year, you're just not going to spend your time in it. That's totally understandable. This is why big corporates don't go after small opportunities. And this is why giving innovation projects to teams that are already working on the company's main product does not work. You have to either have a spin-off, so create your own skunk works, or you have to buy a startup and let them focus on new products for new markets. Basically, you need to have a unit that cares about small markets and isn't trying to make 50 million by day and then scratch out a living by night. That does not work. Lesson number 3. Try lots of things that don't work until you find one that does, and make sure that you have the money to keep going. Christensen says that innovation teams need to expect to fail at first. And I really want to clarify this point because, well, this is really important, so pay attention. Failure is not appropriate for every part of the organization. Big companies are successful because they sell a fantastic product in a predictable way. So, for example, let's look at a product that we probably all know, McDonald's. A Big Mac is going to taste the same whether you are in a McDonald's in Milan or in Chicago. It is a predictable product. So when you hand over your money in exchange for a Big Mac, you know exactly what you're going to get. Also, the marketing strategy has been refined for decades. So they know how to advertise. They know how to do franchising. They know how to nourish their brand. And this is called sustaining innovation. If you work on sustaining innovation, your job is to keep on selling more Big Macs to more people and make sure that they all taste great. For sustaining innovation, your failure tolerance is low because you already have a recipe for a product that people love and you already have a blueprint for how to sell it. So basically, there's no excuse to mess up here, and also you have very high customer expectations. But when a company invents a new thing,
This is called disruptive innovation. For disruptive innovation, you don't yet know exactly who is going to love your product or why. And did you know, by the way, that YouTube started off as a dating site? I mean, that clearly didn't work out. So they carried on trying different use cases for different markets until they found one that worked. And, clearly it worked out very well for them. When you create a new thing, inevitably, your first attempts are not going to go well. Reid Hoffman, the co-founder of LinkedIn, he says that if you're not embarrassed of your first product, you've released it too late. So the aim for making a new thing is not to sell lots of stuff and make lots of money from day one. It is to learn. You want to find out who wants this product, why do they want it, how do they use it once they have it. You have to try lots of things that don't work until you find one that does. And you have to make sure that you have the money to keep trying new approaches. So basically, don't blow your budget on your first idea. And here's what Clayton Christensen says in the book. Research has shown that the vast majority of successful new business ventures abandoned their original business strategies when they began implementing their initial plans and learned what would and would not work in the market. He continues. The dominant difference between successful ventures and failed ones generally is not the astuteness of their original strategy. Guessing the right strategy at the outset isn't nearly as important to success as conserving enough resources or having the relationships with trusting backers or investors so that new business initiatives get a second or third stab at getting it right. Those that run out of resources or credibility before they can iterate toward a viable strategy are the ones that fail. That bit is especially important for the investors here. So you need to understand that if you're investing in the early stages, either as a CFO, investing in an innovation project, or as an angel investor, or as an early stage venture capital, you are basically investing in research and development. And this is a good thing. This is how it works. And now, let's get to our final lesson in this video, lesson 4. To innovate successfully, the innovation unit needs to use a big corporate's resources, but not its values and its processes. Remember that to create something new, the corporate needs to establish a separate unit or even to buy a startup. And one of the reasons for this is that big corporates have processes for big corporate. Have you ever been through a hiring process in a large company? You might have 8 interviews, do a psychometric test, and then do a case study. And then after all of this effort that you do, usually for free, you might end up waiting to get an answer about whether you're hired or not for another 2 months because the corporate has to do the same process with another 5 people. I mean, this is not great, but it happens. And corporates can survive this. But startups, they have to move faster because literally they will run out of money and die. So startups and corporates need different processes because they have different timelines. So if you have a skunk works within your organization, or if you bought a startup for your organization, do not force them to have the same processes and the same culture as the main organization, because literally that is going to defeat the entire point. You're going to throttle that innovation unit. You know that quote from Mark Zuckerberg, move fast and break things? Well, this is what he's referring to. And whatever you may think of Mark Zuckerberg or what Facebook is up to now, he has undoubtedly created a very successful company. So he's worth learning from. Speaking of learning, if you want to learn more about how large companies innovate, then I have a super useful free guide for you. So my company, Tech for Non-Techies, with the help of researchers from the University of Chicago, investigated how the most interesting companies in the world approach innovation. And we identified 6 different types of innovation. And in this guide, you will learn what these 6 different types are and also when to apply them, because not each type of innovation applies to every single company. And companies basically waste lots and lots of time and money if they apply the wrong thing. So don't just look at another company and think, oh, we like what they're doing, let's do the same thing. You need to think it through, and this guide is going to help with that. I really think you will enjoy this guide and also find it really insightful. The link to the guide is in the show notes, or just go to techfornontechies.co/innovation-guide. If you enjoyed this lesson, which I'm assuming you did because you're still here, then make sure to subscribe to Tech for Non-Techies on YouTube, on Apple, or on Spotify. And if you're watching on YouTube, just hit the like button and write me a comment. I read all of them and they make me so happy. So thank you very much for being with me today and learning and investing in your career. I really do love the time that we spend together. Have a wonderful day, and I will see you next week.